All right, I want you to just, for a second, picture a scene with me.
Okay.
It's November. The year is 1717, and it is a biting, freezing cold night in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want you to think of the romantic, glowing Paris we see in movies.
Right. This is not the city of light yet, not by a long shot.
Exactly. This is 18th century Paris.
Mm-hmm.
It's dark. It probably smells of wood smoke and, well, open sewers. It's quiet except for the wind rattling the shutters.
It's a setting that sounds like the beginning of, I don't know, a Charles Dickens novel, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Because we're zooming in on a very specific place. The steps of a church, Saint-Jean-le-Rond.
Okay.
And right there, on those cold stone steps exposed to all the elements, someone has left a bundle.
No.
It's a newborn baby.
A foundling.
Foundling. And we have to be really honest about the reality of that time. Abandoning a child on church steps in November was, it was usually a death sentence.
A death sentence. Oh, absolutely. The survival rate for foundlings in 18th century France was terrifyingly low. You're talking about the cold, hunger, disease. The odds were just stacked entirely against this child.
So, by all rights, that should have been the end of the story. Just a tragic, anonymous statistic in the parish record.
It should have been.
But it wasn't. This shivering infant didn't just survive the night. He grew up to become one of the most formidable intellects of the entire Enlightenment.
It's an incredible story.
We were talking about a man who would basically rewrite the laws of physics, co-edit the most important, maybe the most famous book in human history, and he tried to turn music into a math problem.
And maybe the most surprising thing of all, a man who had the integrity, or maybe it was the skepticism, to tell a king he didn't want a planet or a moon named after him.
Today we are diving deep into the life and mind of Jean-Laurent d'Alembert.
A true polymath. He was a mathematician, a physicist, a philosopher, a music theorist, and a central figure in what they called the Republic of Letters.
This deep dive is going to be a wild ride. We've got a massive stack of sources here, biographies, his own articles from the Encyclopédie, historical analyses of his physics, and even some pretty juicy letters from the salons of Paris.
Right.
Our mission today is to really unpack how this abandoned child rose to the absolute top of European intellectual society. We need to understand his massive contributions to science because, spoiler alert, if you're an engineer or a physicist listening to this today, you are using his math.
Absolutely. We're going to have to look at the traité, the dynamique, the wave equation. These are things that genuinely revolutionized how we understand the physical world.
But I also want to get into the messy stuff.
Oh, there's always messy stuff.
For a guy who was a genius of logic, he had some serious blind spots. We're going to talk about his feud with the most famous musician of the era, and we absolutely have to talk about the gambler's fallacy.
Oh, the D'Alembert system. It's a classic. It's basically the reason casinos make so much money. It proves that even the most brilliant minds can get tripped up by, simple probability.
I feel like that's going to make me feel a lot better about my own struggles with math.
Fair enough.
So let's go back to the beginning. The church steps. Saint-Jean-le-Rond, who leaves a baby on a church step in November. Do we even know who the parents were?
We do, and this is where the story immediately takes a very sharp turn away from that sort of poverty-stricken orphan narrative you might be picturing.
Okay.
This wasn't a case of a poor family who couldn't afford to feed another mouth. The mother was Claudine Guérin de Tencin.
Wait, hang on. I've heard that name. The Tencin, as in the famous writer and salon hostess.
The very same. She was an absolute force of nature in Parisian society. She was a runaway nun who turned her home into one of the most influential salons in Europe. She was incredibly well connected. She was wealthy, prominent.
What?
But she wasn't married.
Ah.
Exactly. In 1717, for a woman of her high social standing to have an illegitimate child, it would have been a catastrophic scandal. It would have just ruined her reputation, her position, everything.
So she made a calculation.
A very cold calculation. She abandoned the child to save her status.
That is just, it's brutal. So she leaves him there, assuming he'll be picked up by the church.
Yeah.
Or, well, let's not think about the alternative.
No.
What about the father? Was he in the picture at all?
He was. The father was the Chevalier Louis Camus de Touche. He was an artillery officer, a military man.
Okay.
But the crucial detail here is that he wasn't in Paris when the birth happened. He was abroad on booty. But, and this is the big twist in the story, when he returned to Paris and found out what Claudine had done, He didn't just wash his hands of it.
He actually cared.
He did. He went looking for the child. He tracked the baby down, probably through church records or the foundling hospital where the baby had been taken after being found. He found his son.
So, happy ending then. He takes the boy home, raises him as the son of an artillery officer.
Not quite. You have to remember the incredibly rigid social structures of the time. Destouches was a chevalier, a nobleman. He couldn't just bring an illegitimate child into his household and raise him as his heir. The stigma was just too strong.
So what did he do?
He orchestrated the solution. He arranged for the boy, who, by the way, had been named Jean Laurent after the patron saint of the church where he was found to be fostered.
Fostered by whom? Someone in his circle?
Not at all. He placed him with a woman named Madame Rousseau. And it's an important note. There is no relation to the famous philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Okay, got it. So who was this Madame Rousseau?
She was the wife of a glazier.
A glassworker.
A glazier. So we're talking working class.
Very much so. A humble artisan home. And this is the environment where D'Alembert, one of the greatest geniuses of the century, would spend the next 50 years of his life.
Wait, did you just say 50 years? 50?
Clearly 50. He didn't just stay there until he was 18 and then leave for college. He lived with the glazier and his wife well into his adulthood, long after he had become famous.
You're telling me he was writing for the Encyclopédie, corresponding with kings and emperors, and still coming home to the glazier's house?
That's exactly right. It's this incredible paradox. That is amazing stability for someone who started life on a doorstep.
Yeah.
But I have to ask about the dynamic there. You have this brilliant child, clearly a prodigy, living in a working-class home. Was Madame Rousseau like the supportive mom in a feel-good movie? You know, go get him, Tiger, you're a genius.
Quite the opposite, actually. And this is one of those tragicomic elements of D'Alembert's life that I find so fascinating. She was a stable mother figure, she fed him and housed him, she gave him a home, but she absolutely did not get him.
She didn't understand his intellect?
Not in the slightest. She didn't understand his ambition, his drive, any of it.
Can you give me an example?
Oh, there's a very famous anecdote that historians always cite. Whenever D'Alembert would achieve something, maybe he cracked a new mathematical problem or wrote a brilliant paper, he would run to her all excited to share his discovery.
Like any kid would.
And she would just look at him, shake her head and say, "You will never be anything but a philosopher. And what is that but an ass who plagues himself all his life, that he may be talked about after he is dead?"
An ass who plagues himself. Wow. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Mom. That is just scathing.
It certainly must have kept his ego in check. But here's the other side of the coin. While he didn't get any intellectual encouragement from her, he did have financial support coming from the shadows.
His biological father, Destouches.
Right. He never officially recognized him as his son, so legally D'Alembert remained a bastard. But Destouches secretly paid for his entire education. He set up an annuity of 1,200 livres a year for him.
Which, in the early 18th century, is not pocket change. That's a serious amount of money.
Oh, no. It was enough to secure a top-tier education. It's what allowed him to enter the Jansenist College des Quatre Nations, also known as College Mazarin, when he was just 12 years old.
Okay, so he goes from the glazier's house to this prestigious college. But it wasn't a science academy or anything like that, right? This was run by Jansenists.
Right. And this is absolutely crucial for understanding D'Alembert's intellectual rebellion. To understand what he fought for, you really have to understand what he was fighting against.
And what was that?
The Jansenists were a very specific, very rigorous Catholic sect. The curriculum was heavy on theology, philosophy, law, and the arts. But scientifically, they were still teaching Cartesian principles.
Cartesian, as in René Descartes. I think, therefore I am.
Yes, but also Descartes' physics. And this is where it gets really sticky. In the early 18th century, France was still clinging to Descartes' ideas about how the universe worked, specifically the theory of vortices.
Vortices.
Yeah.
Vortices in space.
That's basically the idea. See, Descartes couldn't get his head around gravity working across empty space. He just hated the idea of a force acting at a distance. It seemed like magic to him.
Okay.
So he hypothesized that the entire universe was filled with these invisible particles swirling around in giant whirlpools or vortices, and these swirling particles physically pushed the planets around in their orbits.
So the planets are just like debris caught in a cosmic drain.
That's a pretty good way to put it. Now, by the time D'Alembert is in school, Isaac Newton over in England has already published his Principia. Newton has the math. He has universal gravitation. It actually works.
But the French schools were stubborn.
Incredibly stubborn. It was a matter of national pride, in a way, so they were still teaching Descartes' innate ideas, this notion that we are born knowing certain truth in these swirling, invisible vortices.
And D'Alembert, being the budding genius that he is, he smells a rat.
He scorned it. He absolutely hated the curriculum. Later in life, he wrote about how much he despised that education. He called the theology he was forced to study unsubstantial fodder.
Unsubstantial fodder. I like that.
He was hungry for something concrete, something provable. He wanted mathematical rigor, not, swirling invisible particles.
It's a classic teenage rebellion, isn't it?
Yeah.
But instead of sneaking out to drink cheap wine, he's sneaking out to do calculus.
Essentially, yes. And the funny thing is, the Jansenists actually recognized his brilliance. They tried to recruit him. They really wanted him to become a priest. They pushed him hard toward theology.
Wow. Imagine D'Alembert as a priest. That would have changed history a little bit.
He refused flat out, said it was unsubstantial. So then he pivoted. He went to law school for a couple of years. He actually became an avocat, a lawyer, in 1738.
The lawyer D'Alembert.
But he was bored out of his mind, so then he dabbled in medicine for a bit. But he said he couldn't handle the imprecision of it. It wasn't rigorous enough for him.
He sounds hard to please.
He was. Finally, he just couldn't deny it anymore. He fell completely in love with mathematics. It was the only thing that gave him the absolute certainty that he craved.
And somewhere during this transition, he sort of invents himself, right? He changes his name.
Yes. This is when he really forges his own identity. He was enrolled in school under the name Jean-Baptiste d'Arenberg, but that wasn't quite right. Eventually, he changed it to D'Alembert.
Why D'Alembert? Where did that come from?
The leading theory is simply euphony. It just sounded better.
It does have a ring to it.
Jean-Laurent D'Alembert. It has a rhythm, a certain dignity. It sounds like the name of someone who is going to discover a theorem.
It really does. It sounds distinguished. So, okay, he's rejected the priesthood, he's bored by law, he's quit medicine, and he's finally embracing mathematics. He's living with his foster mom who calls him an ass. How does he make his splash? How does he get from, obscurity to the Academy of Sciences?
He starts by punching up, way up. In 1739, he's 22 years old, and he sends a communication to the Académie des Sciences.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just send a polite introductory letter. He points out a series of errors in a standard, widely used mathematics textbook called Analyse de Montre by a man named Raynaud.
That is a power move. Oh. That's like a kid in college emailing a publisher to say, hey, you know the book everyone uses to learn math. It's wrong, and here's why.
It's incredibly confident, maybe even bordering on arrogant. But the key is this. He was right. And in the world of mathematics, being right is the only currency that actually matters. That got him noticed.
I mean, it did.
So the very next year, 1740, he submits a paper on fluid mechanics, specifically on the refraction of solid bodies. This work gets recognized by Clairaut, who was a major mathematician of the time.
And this begins his big ascent.
It does. It wasn't overnight. He faced a few rejections along the way. But in 1741, he was finally elected to the Académie des Sciences. Later on, he'd be elected to the Berlin Academy and become a Fellow of the Royal Society in London. He was networking with the absolute best minds in Europe.
Okay, let's unpack the science, because we said this is a deep dive, and I really want to understand what he actually did. He writes a book in 1743 called the Traité dynamique, the Treatise on Dynamics. This is his masterpiece, right?
It is. This is the big one. And at the heart of it is what we now call D'Alembert's principle.
Okay, I've read the Wikipedia summary of this, and I'll be honest, my eyes glazed over. For those of us who didn't spend 50 years studying calculus, can you explain D'Alembert's principle? Why is it such a big deal?
Let's break it down. Think about Isaac Newton. Newton gave us the fundamental laws of motion, most famously 5 annular. Force equals mass times acceleration.
Right. Got it.
And that's great if you are calculating something simple, like how a planet moves through empty space or a cannonball flying through the air.
Simple motion.
But the real world is rarely that simple. What if you have a system that is constrained in some way?
Constrained? What do you mean?
Imagine a bead sliding along a curved wire, or a pendulum swinging on a fixed rod, or maybe the best example, a roller coaster car on a track.
Okay, yeah, I'm visualizing a roller coaster.
The car can't just go anywhere at once. It has to follow the track. The track itself is exerting a force on the car to keep it in line. Now, if you try to calculate the motion of that car using just Newton's simple family ladders, it gets really, really messy because you have to constantly calculate the force of the track pushing back against the car at every single millisecond, and that force is always changing direction as the track curves and dips.
That sounds like a mathematical nightmare.
It was. It was a massive headache for physicists and engineers. And this is where D'Alembert found a brilliant way around it. He realized that you can just rewrite the equation.
How?
Instead of FAMA, you can write $5 mod exiliotums.
Okay, that looks like simple algebra. You just move the ma to the other side of the equation.
It looks simple, but the conceptual shift is absolutely profound. He introduced the idea of initial forces. He said, let's treat the acceleration part, the ma, as if it were a force pushing back against the motion.
So he invented a fake force to make the math work.
A fictitious force, yes. But by doing this, he converted a problem of dynamics things moving and accelerating into a problem of statics things in equilibrium, balanced.
Wait, so he turned a moving movie into a frozen photograph so he could measure it more easily.
That is a perfect analogy, yes. He froze the frame, mathematically speaking. By treating the system as if it were in balance, the sum of the real forces plus this new inertial force equals 0, he could use the much simpler laws of statics, a principle called virtual work, to solve these incredibly complex problems.
And it let him ignore the messy parts.
It allowed physicists to effectively ignore the forces of constraint, like the track pushing on the roller coaster car, and just focus on the motion itself.
That is fascinating. So he basically hacked Newton's laws to make them usable for complex machines in real-world systems?
Exactly. And this principle is still the foundation of what we call analytical mechanics today. If you study advanced physics or mechanical engineering, you use something called the Lagrange equations, which are directly derived from D'Alembert's work. It's fundamental.
Okay, so that's the dynamics.
Yeah.
But he didn't stop there. He also did groundbreaking work on something called the wave equation.
Yes. This is another massive, massive leap. D'Alembert was completely fascinated by vibrating strings, like a violin string or a guitar string.
Which seems pretty simple, right? You pluck it, it vibrates, wiggles back and forth.
It seems simple to our eyes, but mathematically it's an absolute beast. Think about it. A vibrating string is changing in two ways at once. It changes in time as it moves up and down, and it changes in space because the curve of the string is different at different points along its length.
So you have two variables changing at the same time. Time, which we can call the dollar,
Yeah.
and position along the string, Zixlarchen.
Exactly. And before D'Alembert, could they handle that? Not really. Calculus was still young. They could handle functions with one variable changing. D'Alembert had to essentially invent a new kind of math to handle both simultaneously.
And that was...
He developed what we now call partial differential equations. He was one of the very first to do it. And he derived the formula, the equation that describes how a wave propagates along that string.
This is the crazy looking thing with the curly leads.
Yeah.
Phi partial C to a phi partial Z thing.
That's the one. And what's so incredible is that that equation doesn't just describe violin strings. It describes sound waves moving through the air, light waves, electromagnetic waves. The mathematical object in that equation, the D'Alembert operator, is absolutely critical in modern theoretical physics, from acoustics to quantum mechanics to special relativity.
So he basically gave us the language to talk about how energy moves through space.
In a very real sense, yes. He wrote the grammar for waves.
That is just mind-blowing. So every time I hear a sound or turn on a light, the fundamental physics describing it goes back to this guy.
Precisely. But, and there's almost always a but with D'Alembert. Sometimes his math was too perfect for the real world.
Are we talking about the paradox now?
We are. D'Alembert's paradox. This came about around 1752.
I love a good paradox.
Yeah.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so D'Alembert was applying his fancy new calculus to the flow of fluids, liquids and gases. He wanted to calculate the drag force on an object moving through a fluid.
Like the wind resistance on a baseball or the submarine moving through water.
Exactly. Now, to make the math solvable with the tools he had to make some simplifying assumptions. He assumed the fluid was ideal.
What does it mean, an ideal fluid?
It means it was inviscid. So it had zero viscosity, no stickiness or internal friction, and it was incompressible, meaning its density never changes.
So a perfect frictionless fluid that doesn't really exist.
Right. And when he ran his equations for this ideal fluid equations, which were, I should stress, mathematically flawless, he proved that the total drag force on the object would be zero. Zero.
But, I mean, if I stick my hand out of a moving car window, I feel a lot of force. If I try to run through a swimming pool, there's definitely drag. It's very much not zero.
Exactly. That's the paradox. His perfect theory said there should be no resistance, but reality said there is a huge amount of resistance. He was stumped. He famously scratched his head and said he would have to leave the explanation to future geometricians.
So was he stupid? Or was his math just broken?
Neither. His math was correct for the conditions he set. The problem was that a fluid with zero viscosity doesn't exist in the real world. He had idealized the problem so much that he had idealized the answer right out of existence.
So what was he missing?
He was missing the effects of viscosity, especially in a thin layer right next to the object surface, what we call the boundary layer. That's where all the friction happens. It took scientists decades, really, until Ludwig Prandtl in the early 20th century to fully figure out how to mathematically account for that boundary layer and resolve the paradox.
It's so interesting that he kept hitting this wall, where his beautiful, clean theory was just too clean for the messy real world.
That is a recurring theme with D'Alembert, you're right. He loved the purity of the logic. He was a Platonist in a way. He loved the ideal form. But the world is dirty and sticky and complicated.
Speaking of dirty and sticky, let's talk about politics. Let's talk about the project that really defined the entire era, the Encyclopédie.
The great project. I mean, you cannot talk about the Enlightenment without talking about the Encyclopédie.
For a modern listener, the word encyclopedia it just sounds so boring. It sounds like that stack of dusty books in the school library that nobody touches anymore. But this wasn't just a reference book, was it?
Oh, no, not at all. It was a war machine. It was a weapon disguised as a book. The Encyclopédie, edited by Denis Diderot and D'Alembert, was a revolutionary attempt to collect all human knowledge, science, arts, crafts, history, and present it all through the lens of reason.
And why was that so dangerous?
Because up until that point, knowledge was controlled by two entities, the church and the monarchy. The church decided what was true about the universe and God. The king decided what was true about society and politics. The Encyclopédie came along and said, no, we can figure this stuff out for ourselves using logic, evidence, and observation.
It was democratizing knowledge.
Exactly. It was inherently subversive. It was a direct challenge to the authority of the throne and the altar.
And D'Alembert wasn't just some random contributor. He was the co-pilot of this whole thing.
He was Diderot's right-hand man. Diderot was the visionary. He handled the arts, literature, and the philosophical big picture. D'Alembert was the science guy. He was in charge of all the articles on mathematics and physics.
And that is a huge responsibility.
It was absolutely monumental. He personally wrote over 1,000 articles for it. 1,000! Can you imagine the workload? But his most famous and probably most important contribution was the Preliminary Discourse.
This is the big introduction to the entire 35-volume set.
It's so much more than an introduction. It's a manifesto for the Enlightenment. In it, he mapped out this tree of knowledge showing how all human knowledge is interconnected, growing from the trunk of reason. It celebrated the progress of the human mind. It was a declaration of intellectual independence.
But doing this kind of project came with some very real risks. Diderot actually went to prison for his writing, didn't he?
He did. He spent time locked up in the dungeons of Vincennes. D'Alembert managed to stay out of jail, mostly because he was a bit more cautious, a bit less confrontational than Diderot. But the pressure was immense. The state censors were constantly breathing down their necks. The Jesuits were attacking them in pamphlets.
And amidst all this pressure, D'Alembert undergoes a kind of philosophical shift. He started out as a fairly straightforward materialist, believing in just matter and motion. But he changed his views.
He did. I think working on these deep philosophical questions forced him to question the nature of reality itself. He moved from that simple materialism toward a much more nuanced position of skepticism and idealism.
What does that mean exactly?
He famously wrote that he doubted whether there exists outside us anything corresponding to what we suppose we see.
Wait, that's very Matrix. He's questioning if the physical world is actually real.
He is. He's aligning himself with philosophers like George Berkeley, and in many ways he's anticipating Immanuel Kant. He's basically saying, look, all we have is our perception of the world through our senses, but we can't be 100% certain that the world is exactly as we perceive it. It's a very sophisticated and I think humble position for a top scientist to take. He's admitting the limits of human perception.
But his humility didn't save him from controversy. We have to talk about the Geneva incident. This seems to be the moment where he really, really stumbled.
The Geneva controversy of 1757, yes. This was the beginning of the end for his involvement with the Encyclopédie.
So what happened?
So D'Alembert writes an article for the 7th volume about the city of Geneva. Now, Geneva at the time was the international center of Calvinism, very strict, rigorous Protestantism.
The city of Calvin.
And in his article, D'Alembert decides he's going to compliment the clergymen of Geneva.
That sounds nice enough.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys in Geneva are doing a great job.
Well, it depends on how you compliment them. He praised them for being so enlightened and rational that they had moved away from strict dogmatic Calvinism and toward pure Socinianism.
I have no idea what Socinianism is, but I'm guessing the clergymen did not take that as a compliment.
Socinianism is a specific Christian heresy. It denies the doctrine of the Trinity. It denies the divinity of Christ. It basically says that Jesus was a great moral teacher, but he wasn't God.
Oh no.
Exactly. D'Alembert was essentially announcing to the entire world, hey, these pastors in Geneva are so smart, they don't even really believe in Christianity anymore. They're basically deists like us, enlightened philosophers.
That is, wow. He outed them as heretics in the most famous and controversial book in Europe.
It was an absolute disaster. The pastors of Geneva were furious. They were being accused of abandoning their faith in public. It caused an international diplomatic incident.
Where did D'Alembert even get this idea? Did you just make it up?
No, and that's the real kicker. He got the information from Voltaire.
Voltaire, the satirist.
The one and only. Voltaire lived near Geneva at the time, and he loved to stir the pot. He almost certainly fed D'Alembert this juicy insight. Oh yes, my dear D'Alembert, the pastors here are practically atheists. You must put that in your book. Knowing full well it would cause a massive firestorm.
But D'Alembert got trolled by Voltaire.
In a huge way. The backlash was severe. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who is from Geneva and very proud of it, publicly attacked D'Alembert for slandering his hometown. There were committees appointed to answer the charges. D'Alembert tried to backtrack. He tried to excuse himself by saying he just meant they didn't accept the authority of the Pope in Rome, but the damage was done.
And the stress just got to him.
It did. He was tired of the constant fighting. He was tired of the threats of censorship. He was, I think, fundamentally a more timid person than Diderot. He resigned from his editorship of the Encyclopédie. He just walked away.
And left Diderot to finish the whole project alone.
Pretty much. He went back to a safe place. He went back to his math.
But he didn't stop trying to apply that math to other fields. Which brings us to a field where he really ruffled some feathers. Music.
Oh, yes.
I love this part of his story, because we think of music as art, as emotion, as soul. But D'Alembert looked at a violin and saw a calculus problem.
He really did. He was absolutely convinced that since sound is just vibration, and vibration is physics, and physics is described by math, then music must be a branch of mathematics. It was that simple to him.
But at first he found a partner in this line of thinking, the composer Jean-Philippe Rameau.
Rameau is a giant. He's the back of France, basically, the most important French composer of the 18th century.
And what was the connection?
Well, Rameau had written his own highly influential treatise on harmony that was very theoretical. He was trying to explain why certain chords sound good together using the physics of overtones and harmonic series. D'Alembert read it in 1749, and he loved it. He praised Rameau's deductive character. He saw a kindred spirit, someone else who was trying to systematize art and find its rational principles.
I thought they were friends.
At first, yes. In 1752, D'Alembert even wrote his own book, Éléments de musique, which was an attempt to summarize and simplify Rameau's complex theories for the general public. He wanted to be Rameau's popularizer.
That sounds helpful. Here, let me translate this genius work for the common man.
It was certainly meant to be, but here's the problem. D'Alembert wasn't a musician. He was a mathematician. So when he encountered parts of Rameau's theory that were a bit messy or complex, or relied on the musician's ear rather than pure numbers, he fixed them.
He fixed the music theory without being a musician.
He changed certain concepts to make them fit his neat mathematical equations better. He argued that Rameau's core idea of the corps sonore, the sounding body, wasn't sufficient to explain everything. He tried to impose a logical structure that the music itself didn't necessarily support.
I can just imagine how Rameau felt about that. Thanks for explaining my life's work to everyone, but you changed all the important parts, and you don't even play the harpsichord.
Rameau was absolutely furious. He felt D'Alembert had completely misconstrued the finer points. Plus, Rameau was already angry about the articles on music that Rousseau was writing for the Encyclopédie, which he also thought were nonsense. He felt surrounded by these philosophers who couldn't compose a simple tune, but wanted to tell him how music worked.
So he turned on D'Alembert.
Viciously. They had a series of bitter public exchanges in the press. The friendship was completely over.
And it really reveals D'Alembert's intellectual arrogance, doesn't it?
It does. He had this very Baroque bias. He believed that the modern music of his own time was the pinnacle of perfection. He actually argued that the music of the ancients, the Greeks and Romans, was worthless.
Worthless, the foundation of Western music.
He claimed that because we don't have their sheet music and because time had destroyed their models, there was nothing to look back to. He just dismissed the entire history of music before his own era as irrelevant.
That's an incredibly harsh take.
And it gets worse. He also claimed that music couldn't imitate reality as well as painting or poetry because musicians simply lacked inventiveness.
Wow. He really looked down on the artist, didn't he?
He valued the structure of the music, the math of the frequencies, far more than he valued the creative act of the musician. It's a classic case of a specialist in one field math trying to force another field music to play by his own rigid rules.
Speaking of forcing things to play by rules, we absolutely have to talk about the gambling.
The gambler's fallacy.
This is one of the most famous things associated with his name, but for all the wrong reasons.
Yes. It appears in his work, quote, pile, which means head or tail.
So, lay out the D'Alembert system for us. What was his big, wrong idea?
D'Alembert argued quite seriously that if you flip a coin and it comes up tails, the probability of it landing on heads for the next flip actually increases.
Okay, stop right there. I have to push back here. This is the man who invented partial differential equations. He understands calculus better than almost anyone alive at the time. How on earth does he not understand that a corn doesn't have a memory? Is he just being stupid, or are we missing something?
It's not stupidity. It's a philosophical blind spot. He believed in what he called a maturity of chances. He had this deep-seated feeling that nature, or the universe, prefers balance. If there's an excess of tails, he thought nature must provide a head soon to balance the cosmic scales.
But that feels so intuitive. If I'm at a roulette wheel and it lands on red 10 times in a row, every single bone in my body screams black is due.
And that is exactly why casinos are rich and gamblers are not. Because the roulette ball doesn't know where it landed on the last spin. The odds are 50-50 or slightly less because of the green zero every single time. They are independent events.
But D'Alembert, the great mathematician, he defended this fallacy.
He did. He argued passionately against the conventional probability theory that had been developed by Pascal and Fermat. And this mistaken belief led directly to the betting system that still bears his name, the Martingale system, or D'Alembert system.
How did the system work?
The idea is simple. Every time you lose a bet, you increase your next spread, usually by doubling it.
Why?
Because you believe you are due for a win. And when that inevitable win finally comes, it will be large enough to cover all your previous losses plus a small profit. Then, if you win, you go back to your original smaller bet.
I mean, on paper, if you have to win eventually, you'll make your money back.
On paper, with an infinite amount of money and no table limits, yes, it works. But in the real world, two things happen. One, you hit a losing streak that is so long you simply run out of money to double your bet again.
Or two,
you hit the table limit. The casino literally have a rule that says you cannot bet more than a certain amount precisely to stop systems like this.
and then you lose everything.
You lose everything. Exponential growth is a scary thing when it's working against you. If you start with a $10 bet and you lose just 10 times in a row, your 11th bet has to be over $10,000.
Ouch.
The fact that D'Alembert, the man of pure reason, the man who scorned imprecision, defended this system, just shows that even in the age of reason, human intuition is a powerful and often misleading drug. He wanted the universe to be fair and balanced, even when it's just random.
I find it so incredibly humanizing. He's calculating the drag of fluids in an ideal frictionless space, but he can't figure out a simple coin toss. It makes him feel like a real person, not just a historical figure.
It does, and that brings us to his personal life. He wasn't just a brain in a jar, he was a socialite.
He was a regular in the Parisian salons.
The great salons of Marie-Thérèse Rodin-Geoffroy and the Marquise du Deforme. These were the intellectual and social hubs of Paris. You have to picture a living room filled with the smartest, most influential people in Europe. Writers, scientists, diplomats, aristocrats, all drinking coffee, arguing about God and the king, and of course, gossiping.
And this is where he met Julie de Lespinasse.
His great love story. Julie was the paid companion, or reader, to the Marquise du Deffand. She was brilliant, she was charming, she was witty, and D'Alembert was completely smitten.
It wasn't just a passing crush, was it? It became a very serious partnership.
It did. When Julie had a major falling out with the Marquise and was essentially kicked out onto the street, D'Alembert did something very scandalous for the time. He moved in with her.
In the 18th century, an unmarried man and woman living together, that's incredibly bold.
It was, but he didn't seem to care about the gossip. He nursed her through a terrible bout of smallpox. He was completely devoted to her. They lived together until her death in 1776.
Did they ever marry?
No, they never did. But the bond was undeniable. Her death absolutely devastated him. He spent the last years of his life in a deep gloom, living in a small apartment at the Louvre.
At the Louvre.
The museum.
Yes, because as the perpetual secretary of the Académie Française, he was given official rooms there.
And Diderot, his old partner, even wrote a fictional version of him, right? Le Rêve de d'Alembert, or Alembert's Dream.
Yes, although that was written after Diderot and D'Alembert had drifted apart.
Yeah.
In the story, D'Alembert is sick in bed, muttering philosophy in his sleep. Diderot uses the character of D'Alembert to explore these really radical materialist ideas, ideas that the real D'Alembert had arguably moved away from by that point.
And a fascinating literary caricature.
It is, and it shows how iconic he'd become. He was a character in other people's fiction now.
So we have the math, the music, the love, the controversy. How does it all end for him? He died in October of 1783 at the age of 65. He had suffered from a urinary bladder illness for years, most likely bladder stones. It was, by all accounts, a very painful end.
And what about the burial? Was he honored as a great mind of France?
This is the final insult, and it really brings us full circle back to his birth. Because he was a known unbeliever, an agnostic or a deist who had angered the church his whole life with his writings, he was refused a Christian burial.
Just like Voltaire had been a few years earlier.
Exactly. The church did not forgive. He was buried in a common, unmarked grave in the Saint-Jean-le-Rond district, ironically, right near the church where he was first found as a baby.
The man who helped define the Enlightenment, buried in a pit with no name.
Just like he was found on the steps with no name.
That is, it's poetic and it's terrible at the same time.
But his legacy couldn't be buried. You can refuse him a tombstone, but you can't erase the mathematics. We still have the D'Alembert-Gauss theorem, which you may know as the fundamental theorem of algebra. We have the ratio test for determining if an infinite series converges. We have the D'Alembert operator in physics.
And there's even an island named after him, isn't there?
There is. Île d'Alembert in South Australia, named by the French explorer Nicolas Baudin.
And what about the moon of Venus? Or almost.
Ah, yes. The final great anecdote. Frederick the Great of Prussia, who was a huge admirer of D'Alembert, he tried to hire him to run the Berlin Academy many times, proposed naming a suspected moon of Venus D'Alembert.
A moon of Venus. But Venus doesn't have a moon.
We know that now. But back in the 18th century, some astronomers thought they saw one. It was a recurring observation, probably an optical illusion or a distant star.
And D'Alembert was offered the honor of having it named for him.
He was, and he turned it down. Maybe it was modesty. Perhaps he knew the sighting was dubious. He was a skeptic to his core, remember? Or maybe he just didn't need his name in the sky to know that he mattered. And it's a good thing he refused, because the moon, of course, turned out not to exist at all.
That was a smart move. You definitely don't want to be the namesake of a cosmic mistake.
Indeed.
So let's wrap all this up. What does it all mean? When we look at this incredible life, the foundling on the church steps, the glazier's foster son, the academic superstar, the encyclopedist, what's the final takeaway?
For me, he was the ultimate connector. He tried to connect physics to math, math to music, and philosophy to the general public through the Encyclopédie. He truly believed that the world was understandable, that it was rational. He believed that if you just thought hard enough, you could write an equation for everything, from the drag of water on a ship to the melody of a flute.
Even if he sometimes had to oversimplify the world to make it fit into his neat equations.
He had the courage to try. He lived in a time of chaos and superstition and authority, and he tried to build a scaffold of reason for people to climb on.
I just keep coming back to that quote from his foster mother. You will never be anything but a philosopher. And what is that but an ass who plagues himself all his life?
That he may be talked about after he is dead. She was wrong. He wasn't plaguing himself for nothing. He was building the foundation of the modern world. Every engineer calculating the stress on a bridge, every physicist studying wave mechanics, every single person who looks up a fact in an encyclopedia, They are all standing on his shoulders, whether they know it or not.
So here's my final question for you, listening to this right now. We live in an age of incredible information overload, maybe even more so than the readers of the Encyclopédie did. And we have specialists for everything. We have people who spend their entire lives studying just one protein or one type of coding language. But do we have enough D'Alemberts? Do we have enough people who are brave enough, or maybe arrogant enough, to try to synthesize it all, to try to understand music and fluid dynamics and philosophy?
Even if they get the coin flip wrong occasionally.
Exactly. Is the risk of being spectacularly wrong in one field worth the attempt to try and understand everything?
I think D'Alembert would say yes. And looking back at his life, I have to say I think he's right.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
It's been a real pleasure.
We'll see you next time.